I had been teaching the same literature class for nearly a decade, and by now I thought I'd seen it all. My mornings were usually quiet, filled with the soft scrape of chalk on the blackboard and the faint aroma of coffee that I always brought from home. That day started just like any other, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the beams, and my students shuffling into the room with their usual mix of sleepy faces and tentative smiles. Then he walked in. I remember it clearly. He was a man in his early 50s, which in itself wasn't unusual, but there was something about the way he carried himself, quietly confident, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he belonged, but was determined to try anyway. His hair was flecked with gray, and his eyes had a softness that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He greeted me with a warm, almost shy smile and a nod, and suddenly the room felt a little smaller, a little more intimate. We settled in, and the lecture began. I usually talk about themes of love and loss in classic literature, but today I noticed him listening more intently than anyone else. Every once in a while, our eyes met, and he gave the faintest nod, as if silently acknowledging that he understood what I was saying. And I realized something I hadn't in years. I felt genuinely seen. After class, he lingered by the door. Most students rush off to their next class, but he hesitated, clearly gathering courage. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but could we talk for a minute?" I gestured toward the empty classroom beside ours, and we slipped inside. The air smelled faintly of chalk and the lingering warmth of sunlight. I noticed the way he folded his hands nervously in front of him, his fingers tracing the edges of a notebook he carried. "I just wanted to say," he began, and I felt the unexpected pull of anticipation, "that your lecture today, it reminded me of things I'd almost forgotten, about why I wanted to study literature at all. It's been years since anyone made me feel like my past mattered." I blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. There was an honesty in him, a quiet vulnerability that wasn't about seeking attention. It was about connection. "I'm glad," I said finally, my voice softer than usual. "That's exactly why I love teaching. Seeing someone rediscover what matters. It's everything." He smiled, that same gentle, reflective smile, and for a moment, the noise of the campus outside seemed to fade. There was a warmth between us, a recognition of shared understanding, and an unspoken promise that this encounter wasn't just fleeting. As he left the room, he glanced back and added, almost as an afterthought, "I hope this isn't forward, but I'd like to talk more, maybe after class, if you're willing." I watched him go, feeling a mix of curiosity and something deeper, a flutter I hadn't expected at this stage of my life. And I knew somehow that this was the beginning of a story neither of us could have predicted. The next lecture felt different, even though everything in the classroom was exactly the same. The sunlight still poured through the tall windows, and the faint scent of chalk and old books lingered in the air. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation, a quiet awareness that something subtle had shifted between us. He arrived a few minutes early, settling into the same seat near the front. I tried to focus on my notes, but I kept noticing the way he glanced around the room, taking in small details, the pattern of sunlight on the floor, the way students were fidgeting, the soft hum of the air conditioner. He seemed present in a way that drew me in without trying. After class, the classroom emptied almost completely. The hum of the hallway faded, and suddenly it was just the two of us. He hesitated at the threshold for a moment, like he was gathering courage again, and then he stepped inside. "I've been thinking about what I said yesterday," he began, his voice low, careful, "about rediscovering why I study literature. It's more complicated than I expected. I didn't realize how much I'd buried it. Life, work, responsibilities, and then your lecture reminded me that it's okay to want something for myself." I nodded, feeling a flutter of empathy. I could see the weight he'd carried, the years of pushing aside his own desires to meet obligations. It's easy to forget that we're allowed to care about our passions, I said softly, especially when life gets busy. But acknowledging it, that's the first step. He smiled faintly, almost shyly, and then, unexpectedly, he reached for his notebook. I wrote something last night, he said. A small piece, just a reflection. I don't usually share these things, but I wanted your opinion. I felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity. There was a trust in this gesture, a vulnerability that demanded respect. He handed me the notebook, and as I read, I realized that his words carried a depth and sensitivity I hadn't anticipated. He wrote about loss, memory, and the quiet hope of starting over. I could feel the emotion behind every line. When I looked up, our eyes met, and for a moment, we were just two people sharing something profoundly personal. "This is beautiful," I whispered. "You have a way of capturing emotions that many people spend their whole lives trying to understand." He flushed slightly, clearly embarrassed but pleased. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would, really see it." And in that moment, I understood something important, not just about him, but about myself. It had been years since I'd felt this kind of connection, the kind that isn't rushed or forced, but grows quietly, naturally. There was a calm intensity in his presence, a genuine openness that made me want to listen, to be part of his story. We talked for almost an hour, the conversation meandering from literature to life, to small confessions and quiet laughter. There was no judgment, no pressure, just mutual respect and a shared recognition of being seen. When he finally left, the room felt emptier, yet somehow fuller. As I gathered my things, I realized that this encounter was teaching me something I hadn't expected at this stage of life, that meaningful connections could still surprise you, even when you think you know what to expect. And that sometimes the most profound discoveries happen in the quietest, most unassuming moments. The days after our first long conversation felt different, almost charged with a quiet anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. I found myself noticing small things, the way he lingered by the window before class, the thoughtful pauses he took before answering a question, the faint scent of his cologne that seemed to hang in the air after he left. It wasn't something I expected to notice, and yet there it was, tugging at me in ways I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, after another lecture filled with literary debates and gentle laughter, he stayed behind again. This time, he didn't bring his notebook. He simply leaned against the doorframe, hands tucked loosely in his pockets, eyes scanning the room as if gathering courage for what he wanted to say. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly, "about what we talked about, and about how rare it is to meet someone who really listens. Not just hears words, but understands them. I didn't know I needed that until I met you." His words were sincere, unhurried, carrying a weight that made me catch my breath. I had taught hundreds of students, but something in his tone, his presence, felt different, personal, almost fragile in a way that demanded care. "I understand," I whispered. "It's rare for me too. Life gets so busy, and we forget to truly connect. But when it happens, it's remarkable." He stepped closer, just a little, and I noticed the subtle warmth of his presence, the gentle rhythm of his breathing. There was no rush, no expectation, only a quiet intimacy that seemed to settle over us like the soft afternoon light streaming through the window. "I'm not sure how to say this without sounding foolish," he continued, "but talking with you, it's awakened something in me. A hope, a curiosity, a desire to explore parts of myself I'd left behind." I felt a shiver of recognition. That same stirring had been growing inside me, a quiet excitement tempered by caution. We were both navigating unfamiliar territory, yet there was a trust forming, fragile but undeniable. "You're not foolish," I said softly. "I think that's exactly what happens when we allow ourselves to be seen. We remember who we truly are, beyond the roles we play every day." For a few moments, we simply stood there, letting the silence speak. The sunlight shifted, painting the room in gold, and I felt the gravity of the moment. How rare it was to meet someone whose presence felt like both a mirror and a promise. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for my hand. It was a light touch, tentative but deliberate, as if asking permission without needing words. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my fingers meet his, feeling an electric warmth that went far beyond physical contact. It was a connection of hearts, of understanding, of two people recognizing each other in a way that didn't need explanation. We talked for hours that day, sharing stories we'd never told anyone, laughing softly at memories that were bittersweet, and discovering new parts of ourselves in the process. By the time he finally left, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the classroom floor. I sat there for a while, hands still tingling from our touch, and realized that something profound had shifted, not just between us, but within me. I had thought I knew the contours of my life, the limits of my heart, but meeting him had opened a door I didn't even know existed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that life could surprise me in the most beautiful and unexpected ways. The days that followed felt almost dreamlike. Our conversations had become a quiet ritual. After class, we'd linger in that sunlit classroom, sharing thoughts, memories, and little confessions that we hadn't shared with anyone else. There was no rush, no need to define anything, just a steady, growing trust that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. One late afternoon, the sky outside was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and the classroom was bathed in a warm glow. He stayed behind again, leaning casually against the windowsill, and I noticed the way the light caught the strands of gray in his hair. He looked at me with that same gentle intensity, and for a moment, words weren't necessary. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice low and calm, "about how rare this connection is. How rare it is to find someone who understands without judgment, who listens without trying to fix everything." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know. It's been the same for me. I didn't realize how much I needed this until it happened." He stepped closer, and this time there was no hesitation. We were both aware of the quiet tension that had been building for weeks, a tension that was not just desire, but understanding, respect, and something deeper, an emotional intimacy that made everything else fade away. "I don't want to rush anything," he continued, "but I also don't want to ignore what's here. With you, I feel like I'm allowed to be fully myself, and I want to explore that if you're willing." I felt a warmth spread through me, a mixture of surprise and certainty. "I'm willing," I said softly, my voice almost a whisper yet firm. "I want that too. I think we both deserve this, whatever it becomes." We sat together then, side by side, sharing a quiet closeness that wasn't about grand gestures, but about presence. We spoke of literature, of life, of dreams we had long shelved away. We laughed softly at the absurdities of adulthood, and we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, knowing that the trust between us was growing stronger with each shared story. At one point, he reached for my hand again, and this time I didn't just let him hold it. I intertwined our fingers, feeling the comfort and electricity of our connection. The classroom, the sunlight, the faint scent of chalk, they all seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of us, suspended in a moment of understanding and tenderness. By the time he finally left, the sky had deepened into twilight, the warm glow replaced by soft shadows. I stayed behind for a while, gazing at the empty chairs and the sunlight fading across the floor, reflecting on what had just unfolded. I realized that life had a way of surprising us, even when we think we've seen it all, even when we think we've outgrown hope. Meeting him had reminded me of something I had forgotten, that emotional connection, mutual respect, and genuine understanding could open doors in ways nothing else could. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet joy, and an anticipation for the journey ahead, knowing that this unexpected, deeply emotional experience had changed me, awakened something I didn't even know I'd lost. And as I left the classroom that evening, I carried with me the memory of his smile, the touch of his hand, and the promise that life, even at this stage, still held surprises capable of touching the heart in ways that linger forever.